Hello fellow makeup lovers, how are you guys doing today? I am super excited for this video because we're going to be talking about 5 common indie makeup misconceptions and just some things that I've learned through years of buying indie makeup that I didn't understand when I first started getting into it, and I was so familiar with buying makeup from mainstream brands. So I just wanted to share a little bit of my expertise with you so you can be a smart consumer when it comes to shopping indie makeup brands. If you are new to my channel, my name is Amy and I focus almost solely on indie makeup, so if you're interested in learning more about that, then definitely don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I do also have a video on red flags for indie brands. I can link in the cards right here for you, which gives a bunch of tips on what to look out for and just helping you make sure you're not wasting your money when trying new brands. So I definitely recommend giving that video a watch if you haven't seen it already. So now let's go ahead and jump right on in. So the first misconception is that an indie brand is automatically a small brand, and also that a small brand is automatically an indie brand. For me personally, indie means independently owned, which really has nothing to do with the size. Majority of indie brands are smaller brands, but that doesn't mean that there's a cap to their growth where they suddenly become not an indie brand. For example, Milk Cosmetics and Juvia's Place are both independently owned makeup brands that have blown up quite a bit. One of them is in Sephora, one of them is in Ulta, and they are becoming a little bit more mainstream, but they are still independently owned and not owned by a corporation. Another example would be Lime Crime. They were an independently owned brand for a long time. They blew up and now they are no longer indie because they were bought out by another company and the owner is no longer the owner. She sold it. So from time to time, I'll see people say, oh, this brand is an indie because it is bigger. Like for example, I think Pat McGrath might be an indie brand, but it's just not as associated with her brand because it's so mainstream. But then on the other side, I've also seen brands come out of nowhere and people are so excited and they're like, oh, look at this new indie brand. But when you research further, you'll find that they have a parent company and all these other things going on. So they're not an indie brand, even though they are a smaller, less known brand. So it can definitely go either way. I will say it feels a little bit different buying from a small indie makeup brand rather than a large indie makeup brand. And all the other misconceptions I have to speak about today are focused more on smaller ones, but I still wanted to mention that first. So the next misconception is that indie makeup is too expensive, it's not worth it, it costs too much. And for some reason, people have this misconception that because it's a smaller brand, it should be a smaller price tag, where in fact, it's actually kind of opposite because bigger brands are more likely to be able to produce things for less and for it to be less costly while having more profit, and also to be able to get deals on shipping and things like that, whereas small brands just don't have that and it costs more for the things that they're purchasing because they're purchasing them in smaller amounts. When it comes to shipping, they basically get the same price as if I were to walk into the post office. It varies for each brand, but a lot of small indie brands have handmade products and it just costs more to make. It's a lot of labor. So I do personally feel like majority of the time, if the quality is good, that the higher price tag is worth it. I know paying shipping always stinks, but if you aren't paying the shipping, then that brand has to eat that cost themselves and it can get really, really expensive. Value is relative to each and every single person, so I can't sit here and say that the indie brand will be worth it for you. It totally depends on your budget, how you feel about makeup, if you even care if it's an indie brand or a mainstream brand. For me, it's worth it, but I have seen people make comparisons where it'll be like a $50 palette from Sydney Grace on one side and then a ColourPop palette for $12 on the other side. And for me, I feel like the quality from Sydney Grace is a million times better, but also just everything that goes into those two products, the entire process is completely different. I did want to go ahead and quickly plug that if you are looking to save money on indie makeup brands, I do have an entire Google Docs list of indie makeup brands and codes from influencers from all over. Anyone who submitted a code to me, I added it. So if you're looking for a brand, it's in alphabetical order. You can go through and find a code really easily to save a little bit of money. All right, so jumping into the third misconception is that it's going to ship right away. And this is super wrong, unfortunately. There are some indie brands that will ship things super fast. For one, like Divina. I remembered buying something on a Friday and having it on a Monday. That's pretty much unheard of when it comes to indie makeup. So the thing is that you definitely need to first check their processing time, which is completely separate than shipping time. Sometimes it's 5 to 7 days, sometimes it's 2 weeks, sometimes it's 4 weeks. You never know with an indie brand, so it's super important to check at that before you buy or before you get upset, because it's not going to ship right away if the processing time is a little bit longer. And then of course you have shipping time on top of that. Something to add here is that a lot of small indie makeup brands are one-woman shows, and they are doing everything from product photography to marketing to packaging up the products and sending them to you. So that is one of the reasons why it could take longer. I know, just adding in this extra little piece of information with the pandemic, that I've seen brands fall farther and farther behind because of their waiting for things to be shipped to them. I've also had multiple conversations with indie owners who are parents and they had their kids home, and that of course put a huge block in their normal working schedule. I can't imagine running a business and also watching your kids at the same time. So I definitely always encourage patience with indie brands because there's so much going on behind the scenes. But at the same time, I do truly feel that the brand needs to be amazing at communication, sending email updates if there are any delays. So the fourth misconception is that stocks are too low and the brands are unprepared. And I really want to go a little bit more in depth on this one. This one became inspired by someone I saw posting an Instagram story after a launch of a palette that sold out pretty quickly, and they were like, what's the point? Why even bother launching if the people who want your products can't get it? And they were pretty upset, which I completely understand, because you wanted something, you had the money for it, you waited for it, you weren't able to get it. Totally frustrating, but there's a lot of factors that go into this. And for one, a lot of indie brands have very, very loyal customers. They've built a relationship with the owner, with the products, and they are going to be there the moment it launches. So if you're not, you're gonna miss out. They also have the struggle of indie makeup brands not always having the ability to grow gradually, and that would be to kind of grow with the demand. So let's just say a brand comes out with a palette, it's their first palette, they have 500 palettes, and 400 people buy their palettes. Then they realize like, oh, that's a good number for me, let's stick around here. And then the next time they come out with a palette, 600 people want their palettes, and they end up selling out and having to do a restock, and they're like, okay, maybe next time I need a little bit more. And so they slowly, gradually increase the amount of products that they're making before the launch, while also being smart because they don't want to do too much and then people not be interested in, people not buy them, and then they have to end up doing them on clearance or whatever, and they end up not making their full amount of money back that they put into the product. I imagine it'd be really difficult to know, especially with makeup, because sometimes people see color stories and they go bonkers and they sell out super quickly, and then other times a color story that you might think is on trend actually doesn't do that well. So you don't want to go from doing 500 to doing 2,000 palettes, and then guess what, only 600 people bought those palettes and you have all this extra. I'm just making up numbers to kind of give you an idea, whereas there are other brands where, say their first launch, they do 500 palettes, they have 600 customers, they sell out, whatever, and their second launch, they're like, okay, we have 800 palettes now, we're going to be ready, but they don't realize that all these people are talking about them on social media, or there's just been word of mouth at how great this new indie brand is, and suddenly they have 1,500 customers and they completely sell out and they have to do a pre-order and all this stuff, and then the next launch they do 1,500 palettes, and at that point they have 4,000 customers because people are talking about it and they're getting hyped. So it's hard for them to keep up with the demand, and that's why some brands end up doing pre-orders so they know how many people are going to be interested in it. I see people get frustrated. They're just like, I want to buy this right away. I don't want to wait for a pre-order. I don't want to give them my money now and then wait 2 months to have the palette. But if 600 people pre-order a palette, then they know to have those 600 palettes plus more, everyone who wants them can get them on the pre-order, and it just makes it a little bit more of a smooth process rather than having to guess how many people are actually interested in this product. This is just what I've learned from my own experience and talking to some indie brand owners. So I hope you can kind of look at the idea of not being able to keep up with the growth and see it with a little bit of compassion, because there's brands like, for example, Cleona, which their stained glass collection just completely blew up. And I know that there's a lot of wait time and everything and pre-orders, and it can be frustrating, but I can't imagine being a brand that's used to accommodating 1,000 customers suddenly having 50,000 customers. It's so crazy with social media how that can happen sometimes. I've said this before and I'll say it again, patience is your best friend when it comes to buying from indie makeup brands. And a lot of times if there is a huge demand, the brand will bring it back, they'll do restocks, it'll just be a little bit longer before you get it in your hands. So the last misconception that I have here, I feel is strictly for those people who have not yet really dived into indie makeup. And if you are an indie makeup lover, you know this misconception to be false, and it is the idea that mainstream makeup is better than indie makeup. And I just feel that indie makeup brands are killing it when it comes to formulating things that are unique, colors that are unique, and you will see the indie brands do things before the mainstream brands even touch them. For example, multi-chromes, we're just now starting to see it. I saw it in some liquid shadows, I saw it in a Pat McGrath palette, but multi-chromes have been happening on the indie brand side for like 2 years now. Overall, I think the quality can be so good. Not every indie makeup brand is amazing. There's definitely been some duds out there that I've tried, but there are some that are absolutely phenomenal. For example, if I pull out a Natasha Denona palette, these are like $129. I did get this one on sale, but I just want to show you like some quick swatches. I'll go ahead and do this shade right here. One of the really pretty shimmers in here. I mean, it's super creamy, very metallic, super pretty, right? There's a Natasha Denona shimmer. I'm gonna kind of blend it in a little bit. So that's what that looks like. And just showing you some indie brands I really love. I have this Sydney Grace Cosmetics palette right here, which is the Enduring Love palette. We can just go ahead. Which one? We'll do John right here. I love John. You can see how metallic it is. That's just a tiny little swatch. And just see the foil. See how beautiful that is? That's an indie brand. Although actually, talking about brands that are big brands that are indie brands, I think Natasha Denona might be one. I've tried to do research before and it's a bit difficult to find a for sure answer, but I also have the Glamour-Natrix Cosmetics Sandra Rose palette here. This shade Rose, so creamy and buttery. You can see how it catches the light. So look at that. 110% the indie shadows stand up to Natasha Denona, which is to a lot of people the best shimmer formula ever. Like you go to Sephora and that's what people want, but the indie brands are doing it just as well, if not better sometimes. So for me, I would actually argue the opposite, that a lot of mainstream makeup is not as good as indie makeup. And there's so many brands and palettes I think of where I used to love the formula, whether it be Urban Decay, Too Faced, Tarte, and I thought it was so good. And now I try their shimmers and I'm like, this is so lackluster. So if you are getting into indie makeup, have no fear. As long as you do a bit of research on what you're purchasing, there's so many amazing things to try and discover and to fall in love with. So those are all 5 indie makeup misconceptions. If you can think of any yourself, please feel free to leave them down below. If you have any thoughts on the topic, I would love to hear, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.